Hello, everybody. Welcome to a July 4th edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. And I hope everyone's got a great plan for the 4th of July. We're got pretty lame plans, I think, for the 4th of July, but that's okay with me. I'll probably be the guy that is complaining about fireworks when I'm trying to go to sleep at 9:30 or whatever it will be tonight. But uh, you know, I intended to do a very short show for July 4th because the reality is probably nobody's going to tune in today. Everybody's got better things to do than listen to me talk about the Seahawks. But I see already there are folks in chat. Hello, good morning to Colin Lundstrom and Michael Fawcett, YouTube members, which is great to see. And there was this. I was sitting there reading this morning and had this thought about a stat around Geno Smith that I was curious about, and it sent me down a rabbit hole like these things usually do. And I thought, you know what, I'll do a quick 15 minutes on these couple of numbers. And then of course I can't help myself and I get into full on data mining and looking at these different numbers, and then I tried to get it into a mode where it could be presented, and it's it's ballooned. So it's not going to be the longest episode, but and it also fell in this uncanny valley between where I got some of the numbers that I wanted to, but I honestly could have spent another 4 hours combing through some of the numbers that I plan to pull. So you guys, you tell me, hopefully this is at least some respite for you if you're taking a walk with your dog or your kids, or you're just out on the road or doing whatever, wanting to hear a little bit about the Seahawks. Hopefully I can shine some light or shed some light on a couple areas about one of my favorite Seahawk players, Geno Smith, who, in spite of what I think is one of the best stories going in sports, and in spite of the fact that he is a good guy and does good things and has a great background and is a great representative, all these good things, continues to be a guy that a lot of folks in media, a lot of folks, a lot of fans, are just always going to be looking for reasons to not believe in him and reasons to move on to the next guy. That's not me. So, I am going to share a few numbers. Not all of these are necessarily the most positive numbers, but they are generally going to be coming from a fan of Geno Smith who thinks there's some numbers that people might not know about him. And some of this started actually from there's been some good numbers passed around, and I'll share this one on screen. I think I've got this. Warren Sharp has had some numbers he's been sharing, and um, can I put this in a mode where this is viewable? Yeah. So I'm going to share this tab, and let me go ahead and put it up on screen here. This is probably going to be a little bit hard for you to see. And for folks listening, instead of watching, I will describe it for you. I think I can zoom in a little bit, maybe even more. There we go. And this is a stat from Warren Sharp, who, honestly, if you don't know Warren, Warren's a little bit wild, but he is a savant with the numbers and does things. His view or his perspective that he's bringing to uh, the football is generally related to betting. So he is. I mean, I think he's been contracted by casinos. I think he's worked with a lot of folks. So he's always looking for the edge in terms of betting. That's where all his numbers are coming from. Not necessarily, you know, ultimately wanting to know who's going to do what, who's going to win, who's going to accomplish certain things because you can make money on it. But this number, I think, went around Twitter quite a bit recently, and I think Geno even himself retweeted it. And it was the highest rate of incompletions due to inaccurate passes. And this was just for 2023. And Deshaun Watson had the highest rate, meaning that of his incompletions, almost half of them were because he threw an inaccurate pass. And if you look at the kind of top of this list, you see names Deshaun Watson, then it goes to Tyrod Taylor, Trevor Siemian, Bryce Young. Lamar Jackson's pretty high up there. So is Jordan Love. Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud. Some that's where you get into some decent names of decent players who, when they don't complete a pass, there's a decent percentage of those times that it's because they did not throw accurately. You keep going down this list. Matthew Stafford's still pretty high at 34.9%. He's right there with Daniel Jones, who's 34.6, Tua Tagovailoa, 34.3. On down the list, you keep scrolling. It's a long list, right? You get down and all of a sudden, you're at 20, under 30%. Jalen Hurts is 29%. Joe Burrow's 28.9. Brock Purdy, 28.7. Kyler Murray, 28.3. Josh Allen, 27.8. Dak Prescott, 27.2. We still haven't gotten to a certain name yet. Russell Wilson, familiar name, 25.3. Patrick Mahomes, the best quarterback in the game, 24.5. Then Kirk Cousins at 23.2. And then you get all the way down to Geno Smith at 21.6. Of all the quarterbacks that qualified with a minimum 175 pass attempts, Geno Smith was number one in the NFL last year in terms of passes that were his incomplete passes that were due to inaccurate passes. All right. So you maybe have seen this already. I think it's definitely made the rounds. But this was the number that kind of got me looking at a few different things. Let me see if I can find it. I had another number that I shared recently. I think I have to zoom out for this to be possible again. Okay, there we go. Let me pull it up for folks. Where did I put that? So this was another number where I felt like it was really related to something that many people are not aware of with Geno. And so let me pull up which number that was. Yeah, so this is another number, another stat from Warren that I wanted to share. And let me pull that back up again so you can see it. Oops. Share this tab instead. There we go. This is sacks allowed last year. And this is not necessarily an obvious stat that is a Geno Smith stat, but I will talk to you about that in a second. Again, from Warren Sharp, he has sacks allowed last year. This is not specific to quarterback, but we'll talk about that momentarily. The most sacks allowed last year were 85 by the New York Giants. Is that real? That is wild. I mean, that is wild how many sacks the Giants gave up. The Seahawks had 11 sacks against the Giants, if you remember, in that great game. Fun game for the Seahawks, not so fun for the Giants. You get all the way down, the next closest, the Commanders with Mr. Sam Howell and the Panthers with Bryce Young had 65. So a huge gap, 20 sack gap between first and second, or 32nd and 31st and 30th, depending on how you want to look at it. Tennessee and New York Jets. And I don't know about you, but when I'm looking at these numbers, I expect when I see sacks allowed, I'm expecting to see the Seahawks high, right? I mean, the Seahawks offensive line was awful last year. It was legitimately one of, if not the worst offensive lines in football last year, depending on how you look at it. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's great. At least they're not in the very worst. And so we're scrolling down. You see Denver's, 52. Seattle is still not showing up. Chicago, Cincinnati, New England, Houston, Minnesota, Cleveland, the Chargers, Arizona, Indianapolis, Baltimore. Wait, where are the Seahawks on this list? How do they possibly have fewer sacks allowed than these teams with very good offensive lines. Tampa Bay, the Raiders, the Falcons, the Cowboys, the Eagles. And then finally, you get to the Seahawks all the way down here with 38 sacks allowed. If you can count much easier how many teams allowed fewer sacks than you can how many teams allowed more. So let's do it real quick. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Seattle allowed the 11th fewest sacks in the NFL last year. If I asked 1,000 Seahawks fans where the Seahawks ranked in sacks allowed last year, 999 would say bottom 5, bottom 10, bottom half of the league. There are almost nobody that would have picked the Seahawks to be among the least sacked teams in the NFL. Now, this is the real number that got me kind of thinking about. I made a point on Twitter about there's been a real change in Geno Smith that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And when you look at Geno Smith, one of the things that has really changed about him is his pressure to sack rate. He ranked, if I go back to 2022 and I look at his pressure to sack rate among qualifying quarterbacks, Geno Smith, well, let's see if I rank it. Let me sort it the proper way. So in 2022, this is not last year, the year before, Patrick Mahomes led the NFL with a 9.8% pressure to sack rate. Now, let me take a second and explain pressure to sack rate if you are not familiar. So pressure to sack rate is a really important number that indicates of the times that you are under pressure as a quarterback, what percentage of those turn into sacks. And this is generally a pretty stable number that follows a quarterback around wherever they go. And it is something that often is part of what can lead to, if you have a high pressure to sack rate, lead to a quarterback that just is very dependent on the protection around him in order to function. He is not as able to be creative out once pressure's in his face or he's dealing with it. He's not necessarily as able to avoid, obviously, the worst outcome, which not necessarily the worst outcome, but one of the worst outcomes, which is a sack. So Patrick Mahomes, among a million stats that he led the NFL in and led quarterbacks in 2022, again, he had a 9.8%. So less than 1 out of every 10 pressures for Patrick Mahomes led to a sack. If you scroll down, Geno Smith was more than double that. He was 20.7% pressure to sack rate in 2022. This ranked 25th out of the quarterbacks. This was lower than Kenny Pickett. This was lower than Mitch Trubisky. This was lower than Daniel Jones and Jacoby Brissett and Sam Darnold and Taylor Heineke. This was a not great number. I mean, he was now I will say it doesn't mean that you're a bad quarterback, because below Geno Smith in 2022, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson should be no surprise. He had a 27% pressure to sack rate in 2022. Almost 1 out of every 4 pressure, more than 1 out of every 4 pressures turned into a sack with Russell. But Matthew Stafford in 2022 had a 27.1%. So there's a number of other quarterbacks that were worse than Geno in 2022, but still 20.7 is not a great number. But if you fast forward to 2023, one of the untold stories, because most people thought about 2023 as a down year for Geno Smith, which there's a lot of reasons to say that that's not as true as people wanted to believe. Geno Smith made a big jump. Now, I will mention here the best quarterback in pressure to sack rate in 2023 was Josh Allen at 10%. So he was right around the 9.8% that Patrick Mahomes was in 2022. Patrick Mahomes, 10.6. Again, generally a pretty stable number for a lot of quarterbacks. Brock Purdy, 12.7% in 2023. Jordan Love, 13.7%. Jordan Love coming on strong. One of the best young quarterbacks out there. Wish he wasn't, but he is. And then tied for 6th in the NFL, Geno Smith. Geno Smith went from 1 out of every 5 of his pressures, 20.7% of his pressures turning into sacks, to 13.9% last year. So when I showed you that number of all this, the few sacks that the Seahawks gave up, it was not because Geno wasn't under pressure. It was not, I saw somewhere out there like, yeah, they had fewer total, snap adjusted. That plays some role, but not the difference that we're talking about here. There's a lot of those teams that were up there in sacks that had few snaps as well. And we've seen the Seahawks for years and years be one of the teams that was worst in the NFL in sacks allowed. And everyone has always talked about the offensive line. I've always been clear to bring up that a quarterback has a lot to do with how many sacks a team takes, not just from pressure to sack rate, but also pre-snap adjustments, detecting what pressures, adjusting protections, all these sorts of things, hitting hot reads, getting rid of the ball quickly. And so I think this is a pretty significant development that I don't think I haven't heard anybody else talk about this. And I put together, these are awful, poorly designed, yucky Google Sheets charts that are probably going to be hard to see, but I'm going to show them to you anyway. And we will take a look at these together. Okay. So this is first number I'm going to show to you here is the year-over-year change in pressure to sack rate. And you're like, I cannot read that. That is so tiny. Let me try to zoom in a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. Let's see. Can I do anything here? I really don't know if I can. Let me get out of presentation mode. Maybe I can just zoom in like this. Okay. So let me do this for you. It's not the best, but you can at least see it a little bit better. This is the year over year change in pressure to sack rate. In this case, negative is good. That means that your pressure to sack rate went down. And what you've got here is the quarterbacks that made the biggest improvement in this number in 2023. Number one were Baker Mayfield, dropped 11.4%. And this is absolute. So his percent minus his percent is what we're talking about here, not relative percent. And so that I think bodes well for Bryce Young. If you're a Carolina Panthers fan, you got to be excited about what Caleb Canales might be able to do to help on that front for their young quarterback, because Baker Mayfield made a huge leap last year. Interestingly, Matthew Stafford made a big leap. And I really don't know what to attribute this to. I'd have to dig in deeper. This was not something I expected to see when I pulled these numbers. But Matthew Stafford had just a phenomenal year last year. And this is maybe another hidden number that tells part of the story of why he was so much better than he had been even a year prior. Justin Fields also made a pretty big leap, which is interesting to see. I didn't expect to see him up there either, but I have to admit, I want to take a look at what he was. I mean, where did he rank? He still was ranked 24th in the NFL. So Justin Fields was still 19.3%. This is down from 27 something percent. So while it was a big improvement, it wasn't necessarily a great result. You still don't want to be up there in the 20s. Matt Stafford, by the way, 15.8% in 2023, which just indicates how bad he was in terms of taking sacks in 2022. So I think some of these are just, a little bit harder to say that, they really climbed into being, it was like how bad they were in 2022. On the Geno side, I mean, to come in there and go from the 25th ranked quarterback in the NFL to the 6th ranked quarterback in the NFL behind an offensive line where I'll show you another number was giving up a ton of pressures. I think is really significant. And I think that there's more improvement to be had here with Ryan Grubb. I think that Shane Waldron still did not give part of where I'd say, I don't think Shane Waldron gave Geno Smith as many solutions and tools to use when there was pressure. I also put some of the blame on Geno Smith's shoulders that there were times where I just saw him really reluctant to take advantage of checkdowns when they were there, and he was a little late. That was something in 2022, interestingly, that I thought he started out being really good at and then increasingly got more and more confident and stubborn in terms of pushing the ball down the field, which comes with higher risk. But Ryan Grubb with Michael Penix always had an outlet. There was always a place for him to put the ball if pressure was coming. Michael Penix had the best pressure to sack rate in college football, is excellent in this regard to his game. One of the reasons I really liked him and think that he's going to be better than people know. But I think Ryan Grubb should have more solutions for Geno Smith in this part of his game. So I think this can potentially improve even more, which would be amazing. Even if it just stays stable, I think that would be great. I will show you, if you're curious, the quarterbacks that had the biggest decline. Dak Prescott dropped 4.4%. Trevor Lawrence dropped, but Patrick Mahomes, pretty much the same guy. Justin Herbert, Jared Goff, pretty much the same guy. All right, so that is the pressure to sack rate, but what is the percentage of dropbacks that the quarterback was under pressure? Okay, so first I'll zoom out so you can see the full view. This is the full list, and Geno Smith was under pressure. I'll zoom in even more for you here. Let me get rid of these here. Make it a little bit better. Geno Smith was under pressure 40.3% of his dropbacks. Okay. So what is that? 7th most in the NFL. Justin Fields was the worst. And again, pressures can be related to the quarterback, but Will Levis, Zach Wilson, Russell Wilson, Jalen Hurts, Bryce Young. I've done this before for you as well. If you're like, well, a lot of those could be quarterback related. I've done that. In fact, why don't I just, for the sake of making sure we have the information at our fingertips, the allowed pressure rate, how much of the pressures that were allowed by the Seahawks were due to their quarterback? Well, the Seahawks, only 6.5% were attributed to Geno Smith last year. That was 5th least. And in fact, I would say 4th least, because Bailey Zappi doesn't really count to me in New England. So Joe Burrow was at 3.7. Then Kirk Cousins was at 4.5. Then Matt Stafford was at 4.6. And then Geno Smith. So when you see these other names on this list, Russell Wilson's an easy one. Russell Wilson was the worst I mean, one of the worst, 41st. 24% of the pressures that Russell Wilson experienced were attributed to him. Jalen Hurts, 23% of the pressures that he experienced were attributed to him. So, a lot of these guys that rank higher than Geno Smith in terms of percentage of dropbacks that were under pressure were their own fault. But that was not the case for Geno Smith. It was primarily the right tackle position that was the highest percentage. 37% of the pressures that they allowed came from right tackle. So this is another stat that if you look at this, it is Geno was under more pressure per drop back than almost any quarterback. He was least responsible for those pressures. And then even when they happened, he had one of the best pressure to sack rates in the NFL. I think that is a really poorly told, rarely told story about Geno Smith. Now, why does this matter? Well, if you look at Geno Smith, this is a number that I also don't think anybody has shared, but I'm gonna. If you look at the big time throw percentage when Geno Smith is kept clean. Now, if you want to know what a big time throw is defined by PFF, I will tell you. All right. Just hold on. I will give you their exact definition of what a big time throw is. A pass with excellent ball location and timing, generally thrown further down the field and or into a tighter window. So this is about making really challenging throws that are often farther down the field that are also very accurate. There was nobody in the NFL that had a higher rate of big time throws when he was kept clean than Geno Smith. 7.2% of his throws were big time throws when kept clean. Now you may be curious, what was that rate when he was not under pressure? And I will tell you. Give me a second. Sorry. There we go. So this is when he was kept clean. When he was under pressure, Geno Smith's big time throw rate drops to 4%. So it's a huge change. And I think that the piece to understand here is that there's two aspects of this. One, I mean, Geno Smith makes some of the best throws in the NFL, period. He just does. People can say whatever they want. He just absolutely makes some of the toughest throws in the NFL. Now, the flip side of that is Geno Smith has that level of confidence and he pushes the ball into places sometimes that he shouldn't. I'll talk about turnover worthy plays in a bit, but this is a situation where, he is right up there. If you want to look, I'll zoom in for you. You're talking about, hold on. You're talking about Matt Stafford at 6.1%. You're talking about Josh Allen at 5.8%. Brock Purdy at 5.5%. So he is making some really big throws when he's given time to make them. But I highlighted down here Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is 2.8%. And you might think, well, what does that mean? Does that mean Patrick Mahomes doesn't make big throws? Obviously he does. I've seen him make tons of crazy throws. A lot of those, by the way, happen to be under pressure. And I'll check that in a second. But my read of this is that play calling is also a factor, and quarterback reads of the situation are a factor. You don't necessarily always want to be making throws into tight windows. And so if you think about Andy Reid's offense, there are a lot of times that Patrick Mahomes is not having to make a hero throw in order to move the ball down the field. And so that ultimately is what you would love to see, is a player who's capable of making these amazing throws, but doesn't have to do it that often. So while I love seeing Geno Smith lead the NFL in big time throw rate when he's kept clean, I'd almost like to see this drop. I'd love to see Ryan Grubb come up with play calls and Geno Smith increase his percentage of throws that were easy. And so that's something just to keep an eye on. The other piece that I wanted to kind of show off here. So this is, we talked about what is his big time throw percentage when he's kept clean. Well, let's look at his turnover worthy play percentage when he is kept clean. So Geno Smith still, and this is the negative side, but it's a reality, and we have to, this isn't just going to be a cheerleader thing. Geno Smith still ranked relatively low among quarterbacks, qualifying quarterbacks, in percentage of his throws that were turnover worthy, even in a clean pocket, 2.6%. It's right there, with Jake Browning and Justin Fields. Interestingly, Sam Howell's was a little bit lower at 2.4%. Lamar Jackson does not do well in a lot of these numbers, by the way, but he's up there at 2.9%. So this isn't great to have 2.6% of your passes be turnover worthy. And this is what I was getting at in the last conversation, which is he into situations that are too tight, too often, even when he's not under pressure. So this is an area for Geno Smith to really, I think, really focus on trying to take a step forward. You look at the best in the NFL in this number. I'll zoom in for you so you have a chance of reading this. Jared Goff is under 1%, 0.8%. Kirk Cousins, 1.3. Justin Herbert, 1.4. I don't understand how Zach Wilson's 1.5. That guy's awful. But anyway, Jordan Love. Not all of these players at the top are great quarterbacks. I mean, Kenny Pickett, but CJ Stroud, Matt Stafford, a lot of very good quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen are under 2%. So it's not like this is, I don't want to overblow this. Whoops. I don't want to overblow this. What is going on here? All right. Anyway, but this is a situation where Geno Smith should be trying to improve, and I think his play caller can help. This is not I think this might be the last number, but I'm not positive. This is a look at passing grades and the difference in passing grades when kept clean versus under pressure. And this is a conversation I've had with a lot of folks, including Jeff Simmons. And I think I've made the point how much of a different player Geno Smith is when he's under pressure versus kept clean. And that's led in some circles to talk about, well, Geno Smith is more dependent on his pass protection than other quarterbacks. He's not one of the most dependent on pass protection. He just isn't. And so this is a good way to look at it. This is comparing the passing grades of qualifying quarterbacks when they're kept clean versus under pressure. And so negative is how much worse, how much does your grade drop when you're under pressure? What I want to make, first of all, clear without even looking at the names, everybody's worse. Everybody's worse. And most players are considerably worse. We're talking about PFF grades. And on the far right of this, Joe Burrow is, I'm going to ignore Joe Flacco at the far right. So I said far left, far right. Joe Burrow is that orange bar. He dropped 13.7 in his grade. That's not percent, that's absolute numbers. And what does that mean? Well, if you look at Joe Burrow's grade when he was under pressure, it was 65.3. Now, if I tell you what Joe Burrow's grade was when he was kept clean, sometimes Macs drive me crazy. I'll just say that right now. All right. Let's make sure I got that right. Joe Burrow, 65.3 when under pressure. When kept clean, Joe Burrow had a 79 grade. So you get a 79 again is a above average starter. This was not one of Joe Burrow's best years. And so I almost just throw that out a little bit because he wasn't even that great when he was kept clean. In fact, Joe Burrow ranked 24th in the NFL in passing grade when kept clean. So he didn't have as much to drop as these other guys did. But the majority of these players are dropping their grades by 20 or more. On the far left, they're dropping their grades by 45, 50 or more. Think about that. A PFF grading system that is only 100 points wide is having players drop by a fifth of the total possible grade, at least, and sometimes by half the total possible grade just because of pressure. So pressure is a massive factor in how quarterbacks can play the position. And so first, that's the first thing. Everybody is worse when they're under pressure. Everybody, including Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is the bright red here. His grade drops 21 points when he is under pressure. And that, by the way, is for the guy that is number one in the NFL when in his passing grade when under pressure. His passing grade when under pressure is 69. So even the best quarterback in the NFL when under pressure is a below average passer. Remember, 70 and above is an above average starter. 80 and above is Pro Bowl level. 90 and above is all pro level. We all know Patrick Mahomes is an all pro quarterback, MVP quarterback. But when he's under pressure, he's not. So again, making these points, I'm going to continue to make these points that nobody's a good quarterback when they are under pressure. But the disparity between what they're like when they're under pressure or not does matter and does have some indication of how good of a quarterback they are. So I tried to color code a little bit here to be helpful. Right next to Patrick Mahomes is Dak Prescott. He drops 21.8. I'll zoom in a little bit. Hopefully you guys can see this a little bit. Then Jordan Love, 25.5 difference in his grade. Kyler Murray, 28.2. But of course, Kyler Murray, again, didn't have a great grade when kept clean to begin with. But look at the NFC West here. Brock Purdy, Geno Smith, Matt Stafford, basically all drop the same amount when under pressure. 33 to 34 points of their grade drops when they're under pressure. So it is a very big difference. Not going to deny that's a massive gap, but there is a number of other quarterbacks that have a much bigger gap when under pressure. Josh Allen being one of them. Josh Allen has a 38.1 drop in his passing grade when under pressure. CJ Stroud has a 38.8 point drop when under pressure. Jared Goff has a 42.4 drop in his grade when under pressure. Trevor Lawrence, 43.4. So, I mean, Jared Goff's a guy that Geno Smith is often compared to. He has a significantly higher dependency on being kept clean in the pocket than Geno Smith. So I just wanted to kind of dispel this notion that Geno Smith is the most dependent quarterback on pass protection in the NFL. That's not true. I don't think there's any evidence to say that's true. I think we've also shown through this that Geno Smith is one of the quarterbacks who's improving the most in terms of handling pressure and not having it turn into a sack. We've shown that Geno Smith is one of the best in the NFL at not being responsible for the pressures that he's experiencing, despite the fact that he is experiencing more pressure than almost any other quarterback. So, I mean, for me, that is a lot of really positive news about Geno Smith. That again, people tend to be shocked by because they just, I think they're reluctant to credit Geno Smith with anything. There were a few other numbers. I'm going to see if I can find one. Here's another number that talks to Geno Smith's accuracy. If we're talking about secret stats, this one comes from Jarrett Bailey on Twitter. Of all the quarterbacks in the NFL with 15 attempts of 25 plus yards downfield in 2023, only one had a catchable pass rate of 80% or higher. Okay, let me read that again. And basically, of throws down 25 plus yards downfield in 2023, only one quarterback had a catchable pass rate of 80% or higher. And that was Geno Smith. I think one of the things that, we heard from Caleb Canales, if you heard him recently talk about Geno Smith, he just said this guy is super accurate. And I think that people do not talk enough about the fact that he might be the most accurate passer in the NFL. And there's people going to be laughing off their chairs hearing that. But there's a lot of numbers that indicate that might be the case. And if not the most accurate, right up there. So I'll drop it there. I'll say, if folks wouldn't mind, I would really appreciate you dropping a like and a subscribe on this July 4th. I did not intend to do a 45-minute show, but here we are. And oh my gosh, I got to put this up here. Here is Boris saying Geno stays and falls with the offensive line. I don't think you're listening, man. I don't think you're listening. If that's what your takeaway is from what I just shared, I think every quarterback is massively impacted by their offensive line. But Geno Smith is not more impacted by his offensive line than other quarterbacks, than most quarterbacks. So he is right in the middle of the pack in that regard. So it is not a true statement. And if you think otherwise, show me the proof, show me the numbers that Geno Smith, relative to every other quarterback in the NFL, is more dependent on his offensive line than other ones, because I don't think that's the case. There's nothing more fun than spending a holiday morning working on numbers, sharing the numbers, and having people misinterpret those numbers. But in any event, there's no doubt, don't get this twisted, there's no doubt that Geno Smith has even more potential if the offensive line can play better. No doubt. People forget Geno Smith led the NFC in passing touchdowns in his first season as a starter in Seattle, and that was just with two rookie tackles playing reasonably good football. If they can just get back to that, then yes, I think that there's a lot of upside for Geno, and I think that Ryan Grubb can also help in this regard, and so can Scott Huff. So I think there's ways to take some pressure off. He had one of the worst running games to put up with last year. There's a lot of things that were not great. But I think that Geno Smith continues to be one of the most underrated, underappreciated, disrespected players, not just quarterbacks, players in the NFL. And I'm going to keep putting up things to show why he should be getting more attention and more recognition than he does, all the way up until he makes me look foolish. Like, it's totally possible that he could come into this year and just fall on his face. Could happen. But I'm a huge backer and really believe in what Geno's shown. I love watching the guy play. I'm thrilled that he's our quarterback. Comment from Cindy Shell, who's one of our best. I love having Cindy on here as a YouTube member. Says, Brian, I wonder if a silver lining of playing behind a crappy O-line is Geno has honed playing under pressure. Yeah, that's a good question. And perhaps I think it's too early. Like, a 1-year trend is too much to say that he has figured things out. And I saw enough issues where he still was not hitting checkdowns where he could have, that resulted in unnecessary forces or other things where I think there's still improvement there to be had. But it's possible, Cindy. That's absolutely possible that we end up saying, okay, he is, I don't know if it's as much behind playing a crappy O-line, but just getting more reps. I mean, he has not been a starter for so long, and now this is his second season last year as a starter, and I think he made some changes. I think he showed much more creativity under pressure than he had a year prior, where he was very much more a, on the spot, stay in one place, drop back quarterback. All right, folks. Like I said, give the show a like, click subscribe. I would appreciate it. If you haven't already, join over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. I will convert this to an audio pod here any moment. That's the only place to get the audio versions of this podcast, as well as join the Slack channel where we have all sorts of fun conversations. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did today, and I'm looking forward to another episode tomorrow. Until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at HawkBlogger. This has been episode 102 of Hawk Blogger Mornings.